Okay. I think it's happening, but we'll see. Again, this is new technology to me, so bear with me if you've joined already. I'm gonna check on my phone. Oh, looks like we're on there. So good, very good. And hopefully I can figure out how to, let me mute myself, how I can seat these. Good, perfect. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining for night number 2 when it comes to strategies and the webinar to help people lose weight as well as reverse insulin resistance and hopefully some other chronic diseases as well. And so I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just because I'm a little bit early. I try to be early when I'm not certain of the technology. So I'm a smidge early, so I'm going to give it just a second. So again, welcome everybody. If you're not familiar with who I am, my name is Lindsay Venn. I am a physician assistant, a registered dietitian, and a metabolic health practitioner who specializes in exactly this. I help hundreds of patients every week as far as improving their metabolic health, reducing insulin resistance, reversing chronic disease, coming off of medications, and a lot of variety of other things, including weight loss. And so thanks again for joining, and hopefully you find this helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Please feel free to put any kind of questions. I see Dr. Lauren is messaged me, so that's working. Thank you. So feel free to put in any questions or anything that you have. Hopefully I can get back to them. In like last night, might not be able to. So if you have a question you want to save to the end to make sure it gets seen, feel free to save them to the end. So let me share my screen and get on with my presentation. Let me see here, share. Oops. Try that one more time. Okay, and of course we're gonna have technical difficulty there. Let me try this one more time. Sorry, guys. Share again. There we go. Again, bear with me for just another second while this comes up, and then we'll get started with the presentation on how to do this. You know, yesterday we talked about, where does weight loss come from, or where does weight gain come from, so we know how to lose the weight. We talked a lot about the history and the science behind the bad advice we've been given. And now we're going to talk about what to implement in order to make this a successful journey for you. So yay. So bear with me. Here we go. How to reverse insulin resistance and how to lose the fat. Again, weight loss isn't just about losing weight on the scale. It's about changing body composition as best as possible and just reducing both subcutaneous fat as well as visceral fat in the process. So again, this is my little disclaimer. This is not personalized medical advice. I am not your doctor, so please make sure to consult with your doctor if you have any concerns. There are some slides in here about who should be cautioned by implementing these kinds of things, so we'll get to that, and so you'll be aware if that might be you. And so first, now that you understand the etiology of weight gain, now I need you to understand these additional factors. So first of all, what is insulin? You know, when people think about insulin, they automatically think about glucose. And I'm not talking about glucose, I'm talking about insulin. And so we're going to talk about that and what insulin resistance is. How do you know if you have it or not? A lot of people don't know. They say that the vast majority don't know, about 10% do. And so we want to make sure you know the signs and symptoms to watch for. What does insulin resistance lead to if it goes untreated? How do you put it all into practice? Why it's so important and impactful on fat loss? And then what are some specific strategies for specific groups? You know, there's all kinds of different populations out there, menopausal women, elderly, those trying to optimize fertility. We'll talk about all of that too as we get to the end. And so first, what is insulin? Insulin is a peptide hormone. And so it is something that is secreted from our beta cells in the pancreas. This happens when we've eaten. I call it the fed state. And so if you hear me use the words fed state, that is anytime that you've put in food in your mouth that you would be considered to be in a fed state. So it's only released during that period of time. Its job is to allow glucose to get into the cell. As you can see in this image here, that what happens is when you have eaten, your glucose levels, are going to rise. And in response to this, insulin is going to be secreted, and it's going to go get into this receptor site here, which therefore unlocks this door so glucose can get into the cell. And this is very important because if this doesn't work as it's intended to work, then you can have significant problems. I tell people to think about this like a key in a lock. So this cell membrane here, and this is every cell in the body, your brain, your heart, your liver, your muscle, your fat, you name it, every cell in the body has these insulin receptors and requires insulin in order to allow the glucose in. So if that doesn't work, again, think of this like a lock on a door. So if this receptor site right here is the lock in the door to get into the cell, insulin is the key that unlocks that door. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happens when that lock and key don't work right when we talk about what is insulin resistance. So what does this do? Insulin dictates where our energy goes. And when I say energy, I mean calories. Calories can be in the form of glucose, they can be in the form of other things, but insulin is the main driver of where that energy goes. Are you going to burn it? Are you going to utilize it like you're supposed to, making your heart beat and your brain function? Or are you going to put it into your fat stores because insulin's directing it in the wrong direction? Insulin is a storage hormone. It wants to store stuff. If you think back into our ancestral period, we often had times of feast and famine, and insulin's job was to make sure that when you were feasting or in a fed state, that you were able to store as much as you could in preparation for that time of famine. And so unfortunately, we don't do much feasting and famining anymore, mostly just feasting. And so this has gotten really screwed up. So what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance always, and Dr. Ben Bikman, who I work with, talks about this all the time, always has too much insulin involved. And so your insulin levels are always going to be high. Well, why are they high? And so again, if you think about this receptor site here as a lock on the door, what happens is when our insulin levels get too high, this receptor site stops working. And so our lock is broken. We've got lots of keys, this hyperinsulinemia thing I talked about last night, lots of keys floating around. But if the lock is broken, those keys just don't work. And so what happens is the body's going to make more and more and more insulin in order to try to get glucose out of the bloodstream. You have to remember your body doesn't want to have high blood sugar, or you don't want to become diabetic. So it's going to do as much as it can by way of making more insulin to get that glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cell to prevent hyperglycemia or diabetes. And so what happens then is our fat storage gets ramped up, our fat burning gets turned off, our hunger gets out of control. And I'm going to explain this in the next slide in just a second. And it's because our cells are starving. And so this is my little reminder to stop sharing my screen so you guys can see me. That's why I changed my background from last night too. So the way I describe this to my patients, and it resonates really well. So I'm going to do it here. Hopefully you can all see me okay. But when I explain insulin resistance to a patient, and this is very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Elementary, but hopefully it resonates with you. So I want you to think about this pen as being glucose or blood sugar. I want you to think about this hand being insulin, those insulin, the keys that I was talking about. And then I want you to think about this hand as a cell. Again, any cell in the body, heart, brain, liver, fat, you name it. So in a normal person, when you eat something, your glucose becomes elevated. Insulin is secreted from the pancreas. It helps facilitate getting glucose to the cell and in through that locked door so the cell can go over and do whatever it is that it needs to do. In someone with insulin resistance, this part works the same. We have high blood sugars after we've eaten, insulin gets secreted from the pancreas, but it gets over to the cell, and the cell is resistant to the effects of insulin, so that the glucose cannot get in. So this is a twofold problem. Number one, this cell over here has no idea that there's lots of blood sugar and insulin floating around in the bloodstream. All it knows is it has no energy. It doesn't have any calories to go do whatever its normal job is to go do. So why is this a problem? Well, think about it. If your brain doesn't have any fuel, you're going to have things like brain fog, cognitive decline. If your muscles don't have any fuel, you're going to have fatigue or weakness. If your heart doesn't have the fuel, you can have problems there. But what happens is the body will preferentially store it as fat because there's so much insulin. So fat cells get bigger and fatter and fuller, while healthy cells, heart, brain, liver, all of those cells become less fueled and don't function properly. The second fold piece of this that's the problem is that these cells are literally starving. They have no idea that there's all of this fuel out here. And so they're signaling to your brain, hey boss, I need you to go eat something. And I really want you to eat something high in carbohydrate because I want glucose. And so what do? You have all of these hunger cues, this hangry thing that we talk about now all the time. These hunger cues are real and they happen. People who are like, hey, I ate 2 hours ago and I'm starving again. That's because your cells are starving. So when the cells are starving, signals the brain to go eat. You go eat something. This happens again. Key still doesn't work because the lock is still broken, and you do it over and over and over again until eventually you have so many keys floating around in your bloodstream that you'll find one that works in the lock and you'll feed the cell. That's why we don't die. But the problem is when we have so much insulin floating around, our brain knows this. Our brain senses the insulin and says, I don't need to burn fat for fuel. I must have just been fed because I have so much insulin. I don't need to turn on fat burning because I've been fed based on these high insulin levels. So number one, you can't burn fat for fuel, which perpetuates the fatigue, the brain fog, all of those things. Number two, your cells are starving. Number three, so are you. You feel like you're starving, so you want to go eat more. So hopefully this helps y'all make a little bit more sense, and why some of those symptoms occur when it comes to insulin resistance and weight gain, and why you just feel like you cannot fuel yourself well enough. It's because those keys don't work in the lock. The lock is broken, so we need to fix the lock. So bear with me for 2 seconds. We're getting back to my slideshow. So for the next one, oops, I gotta hit play. So for the next part of it is, well, how do you know if you have it? Well, those couple of symptoms I just mentioned are very, very common. So you're hungry all the time. You feel like you ate and an hour or two later, you're still hungry. Your hunger is disproportionate for how you think you should be feeling. But then there's these other things. Do you have a chronic disease? Anything like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, PCOS, there's a variety of them out there. Any of those chronic diseases, and I'll show you we call it the plagues of prosperity in a second to go over the rest of them. Even things like Alzheimer's can be some of these chronic diseases. If you have a chronic disease, you probably have insulin resistance. Do you have any skin tags? So these are these little guys over here. This is growth. Insulin stimulates growth of things, including our fat cells. And so skin tags are simply excessive growth of the skin, particularly in places where we have folds. Acanthosis nigricans is this darkening of the skin, again, particularly in folded areas. This is just too much pigmentation. Do you have excess weight, particularly around the middle? This is definitely a sign of insulin resistance. Can you just do everything in your power to try to lose weight and yet it just doesn't come off? Again, that's that insulin problem that we've got. You have inability to burn fat because your brain senses high insulin, and you have poor energy, therefore negating some of the other benefits that you would want to be. And then last is the fatigue. Like I mentioned before, if our cells are starving, they don't have any energy, neither will you. So why is this a bigger problem? This is that chronic disease, the plagues of prosperity. I do give full credit here to Insulin IQ. This is their image that they've created that I do have permission to share. So this is the bigger problem, is insulin resistance will lead to all of these chronic diseases. And so anything that you cannot catch, pneumonia you can catch, the flu you can catch, you can't catch high blood pressure, you can't catch obesity, you can't catch migraines. Those things are all considered chronic diseases and are caused by insulin resistance. So the good news there is if you fix the insulin resistance, you can fix a whole bunch of other things on top of that, which is really great, including the overweight obesity factor, which we're focused on here. So let's get back to that piece, since this whole webinar is about that. So when we're talking about fat loss, how do you do it? We have to fix that broken lock on our cells. That is the problem. The lock is broken. So how do you do this? Number one thing you need to do is lower your insulin levels. And as you'll see here, we're going to talk about how to do that. I put on here, this means both endogenous and exogenous insulin. If you are on insulin, whether you're type 1 or type 2 diabetic, you need to lower your insulin that you're injecting because you can develop, even if you're type 1, you can develop what we call double diabetes by giving yourself too much insulin. It works just exactly the same as it does in someone who's type 2 or insulin resistant, where if we have high levels of insulin all of the time, whether we're injecting it or we're making it or both in a type 2 insulin dependent diabetic, then you're going to have problems with the weight gain, the chronic diseases, all of that insulin resistance leads to. So what can we do? We're going to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting and time restricted eating. We're going to talk about which foods are the right foods to make that even easier. We're going to talk about the other causes of insulin resistance besides your diet, which includes stress and sleep. And then we're going to talk a little bit about movement and activity and where you can incorporate some simple things to really help make this journey go a little bit better. So this caution that I had mentioned before, I'm bringing to attention here, people who need to talk to their doctor first, for sure, you need to, it's kind of a non-negotiable. You need to make sure you do it. People who are taking insulin, because we definitely need to change the insulin dose in advance. People with type 1 diabetes, that would include those with really complex or complicated medical conditions. That's a problem because some of your medications may have a problem in incorporating some of these lifestyles. Those with significant eating disorders, we certainly don't want to trigger a reoccurrence or a worsening of an eating disorder. And then, of course, those with polypharmacy, meaning 5 or more medications that you take, you definitely want to talk to your doctor first. Or if you don't want to talk to your doctor, you can certainly find me. I'm more than happy to help as well. So the first thing on that list was intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. And so these terms get interchanged a lot. And so everybody has a little bit of a different definition. So I want you to know my definition of it. So time restricted eating, in my opinion, is no snacking. So you're going to limit your food intake to 3 meals a day and no snacking in between or after those meals. Intermittent fasting involves a little bit longer of a fasting window between some of those meals. And so a really good example where most people start is what we call a 16-8, which would mean a 16-hour fast, typically overnight, with an 8-hour eating window during the day. And so that means that most people will still be 2 to 3 meals a day, but they're going to keep it in that 8-hour eating window to reduce the amount of insulin, because when you eat, you stimulate insulin. And so the lack of eating is going to help bring that down. The problem with intermittent fasting and even time restricted eating for those who are really metabolically sick is that it can be really hard. Again, your cells are starving. You've got way too much insulin floating around, so you're not able to burn fat for fuel. And so in that case, if fasting just seems like there's a no way, no how that you can do this, start with the food. If you can fix your insulin levels to an extent by changing the food, intermittent fasting tends to come naturally to everyone. And so you'll find that you're just less hungry in between meals. You might not be hungry in the morning anymore, and skipping breakfast becomes just a more natural option. And so if fasting seems difficult, we're going to start with the food. And I'm going to talk about that some more also. The other thing you could do is just start with a smaller fasting window. Maybe start with 12 hours of fasting overnight. Stop eating at 7 p.m. and don't eat again till 7 a.m. Those are all really good options. And I do encourage everybody to try to do it every day. Nobody's perfect. And so we want the rule to be that you're fasting. We want the exception to be on those special occasions where you're not. And so to go for that. We will talk about different things like, well, what breaks a fast and what doesn't break a fast. But really, this is a simple place to start for most people and extremely powerful in helping to lower insulin resistance and therefore help move the scale when it comes to weight. So why does this happen? So my friend Shannon gave me this image, so I appreciate it very much. For people who are doing what I talked about yesterday, which is small, frequent meals, eating first thing in the morning because breakfast is the most important meal of the day, all of those things that you've been taught, well, what happens is your glucose does this. You're going up and down and up and down and up and down. Well, insulin doesn't have the same kind of reflex to it. And so what happens then is your insulin goes up and it doesn't have a chance to come down. And so it stays elevated all of the time. Again, driving those symptoms of fatigue and hunger, weight gain, or inability to lose weight. And so we really want to reduce the amount of these spikes and crashes that we get from glucose by reducing the frequency of eating, again, with time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. So what will not break a fast? A lot of people like to have their morning coffee or things like that, and they want to know what's going to break a fast and what's not going to break a fast. So things that will not break your fast: coffee, particularly black coffee, but we'll talk about some tricks, will not break your fast. Teas will not break your fast. Again, black. Water, of course, will not. Broth won't break your fast in most instances. If you have like a vegetable broth, sometimes the carbohydrates in that are too high, but a chicken or a beef broth is totally fine. Anything that is less than 30 calories, we consider to be okay, but ideally we want that not to be from carbohydrate. So if you were to have, we'll talk about collagen, for example. If you were to have a little bit of collagen, which is less than 30 calories, that won't break your fast. If it's fat by itself, and I believe it's in one of my upcoming slides, fat by itself won't break a fast either. And so the calorie content doesn't matter if it is just simply fat. And then electrolyte mixes. We really do recommend that during a fast that you do have some electrolytes. I've added Relight here. This is the electrolyte that I prefer. You have to make sure that these are clean. You have to make sure that they're not made with sweeteners that are going to break your fast. So Relight, Ulta, LMNT are really good ones, or even simply adding some sea salt or Celtic salt or Himalayan salt to your water can be effective when it comes to helping you get through a fast. So common questions. Again, these are things I do not want you to do. I don't want you to incorporate those sugar-free creamers, the International Delight or the Coffee Mate or those kinds of things. They are full of seed oils and junk that we don't want you to get. We don't want you to do the sugar-free syrups. There's one exception to this, the ones made with allulose. You can go ahead and use. They're hard to find. RX Sugar is the company that I recommend. They have a variety of different flavors, and those will not break your fast. So if you really want to put a sweetener of some sort, the RX Sugar, I can put it in here too, RX Sugar. Those ones will not break your fast, and again, have the different flavors. Collagen I put here because a normal dose of collagen has 70 calories. And so if you like to put collagen in your coffee in the morning, you either need to reduce the dose so it's less than 30 calories, or two, like I say over here, move your collagen to mealtime. Just wait until you break your fast, then have your collagen. Honey, I get this one a lot. Well, what about honey? Honey's good for me, isn't it? Honey will break your fast. It's full of carbohydrates, it's full of sugar. Your body's going to sense that as a fed state and it will break your fast. And then again, protein powders as well. Most of the time, those are higher in calories than the 30 calories that we want. So some helpful alternatives, heavy cream. Like for me, when I have coffee in the morning, I'll throw a little heavy cream in my coffee. Because it's 99% fat, it will not break your fast. So if you like cream in your coffee, go ahead and add the heavy cream. If you like the dessert coffees that you can go get at Starbucks or wherever, a really good alternative is to take this RX Sugar along with the heavy cream, and then you can have a very similar experience with a sweet, creamy coffee without breaking your fast. So things like allulose, monk fruit, and stevia are all fine. They won't break your fast either. And then again, for the protein powder, like the collagen, save it for mealtime when it comes to doing the fasting and not breaking it. So training wheels. We call them training wheels because fasting, like anything else in life, is a new skill. We want you to learn it and to learn it well, but if you've never done it before, it can be difficult. So some training wheels that we want you to use as you're learning, but then discontinue once you've become a pro. Some of those are things like fat. Fat by itself will not break a fast. So adding butter or heavy cream or something like that to a tea, broth, or coffee, that will help keep you feeling fuller and it will not break your fast. Warm liquids in themselves are helpful because that actually will calm hunger. So warm liquids, black coffee or tea or whatever, even warm lemon water can be very helpful. Movement. This one's funny. People often think of exercise as being an appetite stimulant because oftentimes you're hungry after exercising. Yes, that's true. You are going to be hungry after exercise, just like you'd be hungry if you didn't exercise. So get out and move, even if it's just something simple like a little walk around the block. It will suppress your appetite for a little bit. And then make sure to have distraction. If you're just standing around in the kitchen waiting to break your fast, you're not going to be successful. So find something else to do, go knit something, go paint something, go vacuum something, whatever it might be. Find a distraction because it will help you get through that, and you'll find that those hunger cues become a lot less. So on to the food. The food part is probably the most important part. Fasting is very helpful. It's oftentimes easy to implement because it's just like all or nothing. I'm either eating or I'm not eating. And so fasting can be a little bit easier mentally. The food is harder because now you have all these choices. Do I want to have toast or do I want to have a hard-boiled egg? it becomes a little bit harder, but it's very, very important. You will not fix insulin resistance with fasting alone. Changing the food is very, very important. So the mantra that we have, that I have and Insulin IQ has, number one, prioritize your protein. And I'm going to go into more detail about what that means. Control your carbs. And again, these are meant to be that way, P and P, C and C, and then fill with healthy fat and fiber. These three little guides are critical in improving your insulin resistance and helping with weight loss. So what does it mean? Prioritize protein. And I did put on here, animal protein is the best. You will absorb and utilize more animal protein than you will plant protein. If you're vegan or strict vegetarian, utilizing as much animal protein as your diet will allow will be helpful. Otherwise, there's some nuance to trying to do this on a vegan diet, but it is doable. So it is an essential macronutrient. And what do I mean by that? Essential means your body cannot make all of the different proteins that we need. They're called amino acids. There's several amino acids which are essential and we have to take in from the diet. And so protein is something you cannot go without, you will die. What is the goal? For most of my patients, the goal is 1 gram per pound, and I put it here in caps, of desired body weight. There's a lot of debate out there on, do we use ideal body weight? Do we use actual body weight? I don't like either of those answers. In my experience, most people know what is a realistic weight for them, where they feel good, where they know they can maintain that weight. And so we want you to pick that weight and use that to establish your protein goal. So for example, if you want to weigh 150 pounds, we want you to get 150 grams of protein per day. For most people, this is a lot, and this is a big change, but you'll find that you feel better, you're not as hungry as often, and you're going to watch things like muscle mass improve. As we're trying to lose weight, we don't want to lose muscle mass. And so optimizing protein is really, really important. I did put here, do not fear red meat or eggs. All of the dogma that I talked about yesterday with the dietary guidelines and all of that, we have completely debunked. Red meat is very healthy and eggs are very healthy. They're probably the most nutritious thing that you can put in your body, especially if you can get an organic or grass-fed, grass-finished form of these. They are nutrition packed, and so they're a really good thing to have in your diet, and we certainly don't want you to fear them. Timing of protein does not matter. So there's been lots of debate that, oh, I have to have a protein shake immediately after my workout or I'm not going to get the gains I want. That's not true. That's been debunked as well. As long as you meet your protein demands and you're doing something that's going to want your body to take up that protein to be used as a building block, then it doesn't matter when you get it. You just have to get the right amount every day. And then we do want you to choose proteins that come with fat. There is no protein in nature that is fat-free. The only way we make things fat-free is by removing something. We take the skin off of our chicken, or, they take the fat out of milk or cottage cheese or whatever it might be. We don't want you to do that. We want you to choose proteins that have fat because you are going to utilize them better. You're going to get more bang for your buck out of that protein if the fat that naturally comes with them is still included. So make sure you're enjoying your ribeye rather than maybe your filet mignon, because you'll get better benefit from those proteins. The next one's control the carbohydrates. And for everyone, this is the hard one. I can't tell you how many times a day I hear, oh, but I love bread and I love pasta and I love crackers and all of that kind of stuff. This is definitely the harder one, but it is probably right after protein, the most important one. I did put on here, it is a non-essential macronutrient, meaning your body can make all the carbohydrate it needs. If you were to never eat another carbohydrate again, you would not die, just like you would with protein or fat. You can go without carbohydrates. It's extremely difficult to do. Lots of people do it, but it is something that you don't have to worry about. Oh, is my nutrition going to suffer because I'm not getting carbs? No, not at all. And the lower you can get your carbs, the faster you're going to heal your insulin resistance and slim down. So the general guideline that I give people is less than 50 grams of total carbohydrate per day. And I put that word total there in caps because I get a lot of questions about, well, what about net carbs? My carb balanced tortillas, they say that they only have 2 grams of net carbs. Well, if you flip it over on the back, there's, 16 grams of total carbs, 2 grams of net carbs. What they're trying to do is trick you. They've put in these synthetic fibers so that they can subtract, if you're counting net carbs, how many net carbs are in there. This doesn't work. Many patients and friends and whatnot have worn a continuous glucose monitor, had a 0 net carb keto treat, and their blood sugar goes up. So we know that's not true. We know that there's actually absorption, even though they claim the fiber is not absorbed. It's all just a scam in order to get you to buy those kinds of things. And so the real rule on that is if it's a real food, meaning an apple or a potato or nuts, feel free, you can subtract the fiber on that. If it's any kind of processed food, processed to any extent whatsoever, you cannot subtract the fiber. You need to count it as a total carbohydrate. So real food, you can subtract fiber. Fake food, you cannot. Things to help. If you are going to have a carbohydrate with your meal, have it at the end of the meal. You will absorb a little bit less of it. So that's very helpful. Again, compare real food versus fake food. Focus on the real food. Oh, I got a thumbs up somehow. And then don't be fooled by all those keto products that are out there. Most of them are a scam and are not going to help you. You can use them as training wheels at the beginning. Again, training wheels are meant to be removed over time. And so we want you to only use them as training wheels. And then make sure to get creative. My number one piece of advice for my patients when they're first starting out is to not change. Don't try to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow. People will fail in that regard. So eat the foods that you're already eating, but modify the carbohydrate portion of it. So if you're having a cheeseburger like this gentleman, get rid of the bun, do it protein style, or put it in a lettuce wrap or use a knife and fork. If you're having tacos, get rid of the shell, put it in a salad, make a burrito bowl with cauliflower rice, something along those lines. Don't change it up so much that you're going to fail, but change it up enough to get rid of the carbohydrate portion. Next, fill with healthy fats and fiber. So fats, keto diet, I don't love the term keto because people think, oh, I have to eat a lot of fat. Well, we don't want you to do that here because fats are calories and calories do count. And so we don't want you to add a whole bunch of fat. Most importantly, we want you to avoid these seed oils. So this little CNS trick that I have written here, if your oil begins with a C or an S, things like canola, cottonseed, soybean, safflower, all of those are seed oils, and we want you to get rid of them. If they have the word seed in them, we want you to get rid of them. The only exception to this is coconut. Coconut oil begins with a C, and yes, it's totally fine. It is not a seed oil, but anything else that begins with a C or an S and has the word seed in it, don't have. These are very inflammatory, very pro-insulin resistance, very pro-fat gain. We want you to get rid of them. So we want you to choose foods that naturally have fat. So avocados, olives, your meats, your eggs, your cheeses, those kinds of things. And then only add in more fat if you're still feeling hungry or satisfied. This is this lever piece. We love that fat is a lovely lever that you can flex depending on how you're feeling. If you're really hungry still after a meal, or you're just feeling really unsatisfied from the food you ate, if you had a chicken breast with some lettuce, you're not going to be very satisfied. Add some fat, add some avocado or a healthy salad dressing or something along those lines. And then on the other hand, if you're full all the time, if you just feel like you can't get enough protein because you're so full, dial that fat back. And so don't be adding fat unless you feel like you need to. Choosing high fiber vegetables and eating them first can be very, very helpful as well to help fill you up and satiate you. And then again, adjust that lever based on your progress. I feel like I'm talking fast. Hopefully it's not too fast. And my screen doesn't want to move on. There it goes. So what does this look like? And a lot of people have a hard time visualizing this. So if I were to intermittent fast and not have breakfast, for me, this is what a day might look like. I'm gonna have my coffee with heavy cream in the morning. I'm gonna have a nice chef salad with lots of protein on it, and then have something like a steak and a vegetable for dinner. If you like breakfast and you don't want to fast through breakfast, or you love breakfast and you want to have that to break your fast around 10 or 11, absolutely. Eggs, bacon, sausage, different kinds of omelets with cheese, excellent low carb options that taste really good. Then fill again with a very protein rich meal with some vegetables, and then maybe do your fast later in the day. And honestly, fasting later in the day is better for you than fasting earlier in the day. But for most people, family and social time becomes a barrier to that. So fasting through breakfast is just fine. So why do we focus on the carbohydrates? Again, I'm giving credit to Dr. Ben Bikman. This is out of one of his presentations. This is why. If you look at insulin, and this is the thing that we're wanting to reduce the most, remember, this is how we fix that lock on that door that's broken. How do we know which is the best thing to do? Well, fat down here in blue is way down here. This is the amount of insulin that gets excreted when we eat just fat. Very, very low, if any at all. Protein, again, very, very low. It's a little bit more than fat, but very, very low insulin stimulating effect to that. For an insulin sensitive person, that's this lower line here, you're still going to have a significant insulin spike from a food that's a carbohydrate. And for an insulin resistant person, you're going to have that spike and it's going to stay elevated longer, like I had depicted in the previous couple of slides. So we really want to be careful with carbohydrates. They are definitely the culprit when it comes to worsening or perpetuating insulin resistance and therefore weight gain. So I want to explain this in one more way. And again, I like to explain because it's easier to implement dietary changes if you understand what's going on. So I love this analogy. I think I stole this off of Dr. Jason Fung. So when we eat insulin rising foods, things like carbohydrates and sugar, our body acts just like a refrigerator and a freezer in our house. You know, if you go to the grocery store and you come home, everything that you can fit into the refrigerator, you're going to put in the refrigerator because it's on the main level. It's easy to get into. It's easy to pull things in and out of, very easy, quick to use. This is just like our glycogen. This is where we actually store carbohydrates. Our freezer might be in the garage. It might be in the basement. A lot harder to get to, a lot harder to use. You have to thaw out the food. It's just more difficult to use. And we compare that to our fat. So we do the same thing in the body. We're going to burn through glycogen first because it's an easy, simple place to get our energy from. And then we're going to turn to our fat once our glycogen stores have been emptied. And here's the image to kind of depict that. So if you do insulin lowering strategies, you're going to empty out your fridge, and then you're going to be forced to use the freezer, or what is also known as your fat. And so that's why fat burning becomes more of an option, because you don't have this quick form of energy as readily available. You now have to resort to the freezer, which is a little bit harder to use, just like our fat. So what else matters? So the three primary causes of insulin resistance, and I do wanted to bring this up because I see lots of patients who are doing the diet and they're doing the fasting and they're still struggling with insulin resistance. Stress and sleep matter. And I put stress and sleep together. I highlighted stress right here. Stress is a primary cause of insulin resistance. And so if you have a high stress job, if you have a situation in life, death in the family, a marital dispute, whatever it might be, you're going to worsen your insulin resistance. You're going to notice potentially some weight gain. You're going to notice a change in how your blood sugars, your energy, your brain fog, and those things respond. So stress and sleep absolutely matter. So what can you do? Some things you can't change. Sometimes you can't quit your job. Sometimes you can't get away from your spouse that you're mad at, whatever it might be. So what can you do? And I really encourage people to focus on the things that you can do. And that's why diet's so easy and why fasting is so easy. Those are things that are fixable and doable realistically. But some other things you can do for your stress: make sure you're getting adequate sleep. Sleep hygiene is what we call it. Try to go to bed at the same time every day, get up at the same time every day. Make sure you turn off your screens 2 hours before you go to bed. Make sure your room is dark, all of those things. With exercise, this is really important. Do what you enjoy. You know, when we're talking about stress reduction, doing exercise you hate is not going to help reduce your stress. So find some exercise that you enjoy and incorporate that. Get outside. If anybody saw on Facebook this morning, I was out first morning. The sunrise here was gorgeous. First morning sunlight really helps with circadian rhythm and stress and sleep. Doing some grounding. You know, you can either get the grounding pads, or if you have a chance, like I'm lucky enough here, I can go out barefoot and ground a little bit on the earth, and that definitely helps. Things like meditation and breathing techniques can be very helpful. There's different supplements out there that can help reduce stress and cortisol. Gratitude. Gratitude is an easy practice. My friend Carly talked about this the other day, and maybe it hasn't posted yet at Insulin IQ, but really talking about journaling once a week. They found in the study that she had cited that people who journaled once a week and wrote down 5 to 10 things that they were grateful for had less insulin resistance and chronic disease than people who did not. Things like prayer and spirituality, being social, getting around people, that really helps to reduce stress, especially if the people you're around make you laugh. You know, if you have a loved one, even an animal or a baby, somebody that you can share touch with can be very helpful. Again, laughter, and then focusing on the things you have control over. People tend to focus on the things they don't have control over. I'm guilty of that. But focus on the things you do have control over and work to make a change when it comes to those. And then the last piece in the 3 causes of insulin resistance is inflammation. And so inflammation is a tricky one. And so the hard part is what is driving your inflammation if you have it? You know, do you have some fatty liver going on? People with insulin resistance almost always have fatty liver, and that is an inflammatory process. Do you have leaky gut? Do you have some dysbiosis going on that's creating problems in the gut? Do you have joint pain from an injury or even from some kind of, autoimmune disease? I have listed as well. Things like Hashimoto's is inflammatory, any kind of those autoimmune diseases. Do you have food sensitivities that you've been ignoring? Are you maybe a little bit gluten sensitive or dairy sensitive, but you don't want to get rid of those things? That can lead to inflammation. And then, of course, toxin exposure. We want to limit exposure to toxins as best as we can. Organic foods, filtered water, all of those things that we can do to eliminate that. But this one's tricky because a lot of times we don't have a lot of control over these things. And so it's not as easy of a lever to pull or things to change. And so this is my biggest advice. What can you modify? Every little bit counts. The diet, I know it's not easy. Everybody wants to have those lovely treats and sweets and breads and pastas, but you can change this. And so work on your diet, change the food, incorporate some fasting, figure out what time works for you. Get some more movement in, work on your sleep, manage your stress. Those are all just the top 5 things that I'd really like for you to work on when it comes to improving your health. Some other topics I wanted to bring up here. The one question I also get with the intermittent fasting is, well, I've heard that if I fast, I'm going to go into starvation mode. And I really like to just debunk this as quickly as I can and just say, I'm not asking you to starve yourself. We are doing something called feasting and fasting. So during your eating window, I want you to eat. We want to get adequate protein. We want to get adequate calories. We want you to feast so the body knows it's going to have fuel coming. And then you fast. And so you get both of these happening. The Biggest Loser, I always use this example. That was an example of starvation mode, taking in very few calories, exercising significantly, doing it in a drastic way. They were literally starving. And the reason that there's no reunion for The Biggest Loser is because these people all gain their weight back. They've slowed down their metabolism. They've created metabolic problems. And so the goal here is to lower insulin. We don't want to lower metabolism. So focus on this, and I'm going to give you a little more proof here. So there was a study, and this one was done, I thought I had it on here. It was a long time ago, back when we could inject people with insulin who didn't need it. I want to say it was 1964. But they looked at people before they gave them insulin, and then they looked at them after they gave them insulin, and they measured their metabolic rate. So before insulin, their metabolic rate was 2,042. Then they gave them some insulin, more insulin than they needed because they didn't need it. Their metabolic rate dropped to 1728. So definitely high insulin, whether you're creating it or whether you're injecting it, is going to slow down your metabolism. So we want to get insulin down. This other study that had looked at this as well, so I cited it up here, they measured the BMR, basic metabolic rate, in people on different kinds of diets. And so low carbohydrate diet had the best metabolic rate, moderate carbohydrate was in the middle, and the high carbohydrate had the lowest metabolic rate of all of those that they looked at. So just more proof. It has been studied, something really to look at. David Ludwig, many of you are familiar with, was part of that study. So it was a good one. And now, like I said before, I really want to talk about some specific groups. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I know most of the people who follow me or who come to me are in their midlife, I don't want to call it crisis, but in the middle ages and menopausal and things like that. So I definitely want to touch on that. People who are trying to improve their body composition, people who are struggling with fertility. And then again, we're going to talk about those who are thin, but may also have insulin resistance and all the symptoms of it. So I did put early and menopausal in the same group because they have similar strategies. In people in this group, there's a lot of debate out there, and I'm sure you have all seen it. Oh, people in menopause shouldn't fast, or whatever the dogma is of the day. I've worked with thousands of people, especially in this category. There's no one size fits all. My suggestion is try it one way, and if it doesn't work, then we try it a different way. So maybe you start out by fasting through breakfast. If that doesn't work, if you're not noticing any benefit from it, maybe you need to move to fasting through dinner, or maybe you need to have breakfast and dinner and fast in between the two. So we want to try different fasting windows. And again, it isn't one size fits all. Everybody's different, and they need to play with it until they find success. Prioritizing protein is a must, especially in this age category. Sarcopenia, which means muscle wasting, happens. It just naturally happens. We lose hormones, we lose all kinds of things, and we'll talk about that on Thursday. But if you're not getting enough protein, you're going to lose muscle mass, and any weight loss effort is going to be muscle loss and fat loss, and we don't want that to happen. This age group tends to struggle with getting in enough calories, especially if they have a short eating window. If you're only having a 6-hour eating window, you might be hypo or low calorie, and that can be a problem. Your metabolism will slow down if day after day, week after week, you are not getting enough calories and you are in starvation mode. So you need to make sure that your fasting window and your diet allow for adequate calories so you don't slow down that metabolism. Resistance exercise is extremely important. They show that only 2 days a week is all you really need. If you can do more, that's even better. But getting in some form of resistance exercise, whether it be body weight exercises or going to the gym and lifting weights, very important. Making sure if you want to be on HRT, that you have good hormonal balance. And then these must-have supplements. I'll share a link when I'm done sharing this slide presentation. I have a Fullscript store where I have a must-haves group, but this essentially is things like magnesium, electrolytes, vitamin D with K2, very important in this age category to optimize their efforts. For those who are trying to add or retain muscle, and this can be elderly, this can also be people who are just, they've been sedentary for a long time and now they want to get strong. And so again, you must prioritize your protein. For this group, again, if you can't get adequate protein and calories, you might consider time-restricted eating instead of intermittent fasting, and that way you can make sure you're getting enough in. You might want to consider a shorter fasting window. Again, making sure caloric intake is adequate. Supplementation with creatine can be extremely helpful. So 5 to 10 grams a day is what most people recommend. Can also be helpful with cognition. And then again, resistance training is a must. If you want to put on muscle, you got to work the muscle. The next one's our PCOS group. And so for those of you who don't know, PCOS is the #1 cause of infertility in females, and it is directly related to insulin resistance. And so everything I've talked about is going to help someone with PCOS. But some people with PCOS really struggle with fasting. And so there's some additional things that you might be able to do. #1, I do recommend flex your fasting muscle. Consider hormone fasting. And hormone fasting was really started and implemented by Mindy Pelz. She wrote this book, Fast Like a Girl. Here's an example of a calendar. And so it really depends on where you're at in your cycle, on how you want to fast and how far you want to drop your carbohydrates and things like that. So this is definitely something to look into for those who are struggling with PCOS. Making sure the diet is proper is very, very important. There are supplements to help, and sometimes people will need medications, but hopefully not. Hopefully the diet and the fasting are enough. So, and then last, this group that we call TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. These are people with significant insulin resistance, visceral fat, so that protruding belly where we've accumulated fat on the inside of our cavity, not on the outside. Subcutaneous is the stuff you can pinch and jiggle. Visceral is the stuff that creates more of like a beer belly. I call it the dad bod. If you think of men with a dad bod, this is that group. This group, they don't necessarily want to lose weight, but they want to change their body composition and reduce that visceral fat. And so again, prioritizing protein. You've heard me say this over and over and over again. Making sure we're getting enough calories. Again, we don't want to lose muscle and fat. We want to make sure that we're getting enough in so that we're just reducing visceral fat. Low carb is a must in this group. If you want to reduce insulin resistance and reduce that visceral fat, you have to go low carb. You have to incorporate some fasting. Again, resistance training is important, and yes, the supplements can definitely help. So common side effects from implementing these kind of things. Constipation, yes, it can occur. And so you want to be careful with that. Something that you can do to help with that is magnesium. We recommend either citrate or glycinate when it comes to constipation. Brain fog is extremely common. When we switch from using our refrigerator to using our freezer, meaning we're stopped burning glucose, we're going to start burning fat. Brain fog can happen, and that's because we have depleted electrolytes. And so we got to stay on top of our electrolytes, sodium in particular. So make sure to add that in if you have brain fog or if you want to prevent it. Muscle cramping is common. For that one, we recommend magnesium glycinate. That one's specific for muscle cramps. Fatigue can also be happening. The electrolytes will help. And then also I do recommend a vitamin D3 with K2 for pretty much everybody. There is a very strong correlation between insulin resistance and low vitamin D. And so we want to make sure that your vitamin D levels are optimized. And then the last piece for fatigue, you can incorporate MCT oil. Sometimes when people have a really hard time getting into that freezer, and burning their fat, we have to remind the body that fat can be used as fuel, and we do that by way of turning fat into ketones. Well, if your body doesn't remember this, if it doesn't say, I don't even know what a ketone looks like anymore, then adding in MCT oil, which is rapidly converted into ketones, can remind those mitochondria that yes, ketones are a good fuel source. It's actually a better fuel source. And once that body's been reminded what they are, it's easier to burn fat and turn your own fat into ketones rather than the MCT oil. Again, I'll post this in the chat when we're done so everybody's got it, but this is those must-have supplements that I recommend. So again, this is coming to the end of it. So my big message is you can do it. There's no reason that you can't do it. There is no better time to start. You can start tomorrow. I know the holidays are coming up, but the sooner you start, the sooner you're going to get to your goal. So get going, implement these things I've talked about. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about supplements and tools to help. There are additional things. I know many people in this group have started the diet and they've started the fasting, but they're still not seeing the progress they want. So there are supplements and tools to help that we're going to go over in detail. And we're going to talk about very specific cases as well that may pertain to you. And then on Thursday, we're going to go into a real deep dive. We're going to talk about all the other problems that can happen with weight gain, because again, this is about weight. Do we need to look at thyroid? Do we need to look at menopause and hormones or testosterone in men, things like that? Again, vitamin D. And then how can you achieve or obtain further evaluation on your specific situation? Again, we'll talk about that all on Thursday. So I hope you can join. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if I can find any questions or comments in here. So let's see here. I'm getting a few thank yous. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. I can find it on my phone, so that's good. John says, I eat better on this protocol than I have in 40 years, and I lost 91 pounds in 8 months, 3 pounds a week average. Good job, John. Way to go. And it does, it works. If you can do it, it works. I tell people it's just like medications. If you're taking hypertensive medications or blood pressure medications to lower your blood pressure, well, they're not going to work if you don't take them. Your diet's exactly the same. It's not going to work if you don't do it. So you have to put in the effort and actually do it for it to work. Let's see here. Lots of people sharing. I appreciate it. Ro, hi Ro. She says insulin rising foods. I love that. Awesome. I don't see any. Oh, what about sugar-free gum? So Denise is asking about sugar-free gum. Yeah, most of them work just fine. The one that I've always chewed, I use the xylitol ones. I think it's Orbitz is the one, but most of the time you're not having it enough that you're going to break a fast when it comes to your fasting with something like that. And sometimes that, just distracting the mouth from food is not a bad thing. Let's see here. Yeah, just lots of sharing. I appreciate you guys sharing. I'm trying to get the word out. It's doing my best to share the word, and sometimes it's hard. I don't have that many followers, so appreciate it. Oh, hi Trent. Trent was on here at one point. Perfect. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions on here. If you have a question, I'll stay on for just another minute or two, post it again so it shows up. And that way I make sure to get to it. Nope, just more sharing. I love it. Hopefully we had a good turnout, so I appreciate it. Again, thanks everybody for joining. Don't forget tomorrow. We'll do it again tomorrow at 6 and Thursday